fired from growing websites. Very good. But don't worry, all of your problematic faves are on this list. You've obviously got Google and Meta topping the charts, followed by Microsoft and Amazon, and then all your favorite startups and ISVs are there too, because everywhere that the big 4 or 5 tech companies go, well, culture dictates that everybody else follows, right? So everyone's being fired. It's bleak, it's real, and it's mostly unfair to the normal people just trying to work a job, right? Sucks. So the same technology companies, buoyed by the stay-at-home, work-at-home COVID-19 boom, it's the one good bit of COVID, right, I suppose, they overhired when their profits were big, and they misprojected and then fired all the staff, right? And it was the only way, really, they could keep their investors happy in the not really a downturn, just the market returning to normal kind of place. Because really, we'd taken in this idea that profits and growth always have to go up, right? So to add insult to injury, a lot of these companies use this as an opportunity to ditch the highest paid and most experienced members of staff in a cynical play to try and rebalance salaries over a lot of years. And basically, professionals had finally realized what they were worth and how much money they were making for these organizations. And actually, they'd worked out how they could crunch that number back down. And really, I suppose the worst part of it is that, is this a technology industry in crisis? Is this really a crisis? I kind of think this is by design. This is capitalism working as intended. Capitalism only works when the output of labor is sold for more than its cost, right? Simple. It's the backbone of the system, that private ownership of the means of production and the capitalization of the profits produced by wage labor. These are the rules, right? This is the system that we're living in. So the last 15 years of technology growth has fostered this kind of unhealthy relationship between technology consumers, technology workers, and the largest organizations in the world. Big, difficult power struggle here. So by being encouraged to treat behemoth enterprises like they are sports teams that you cheer for and jump between, and by listening to the "we are family" rhetoric, that was always a hiring technique, really, not an expression of empathy. We were kind of shocked when at the first sign of economic change, these same companies just kind of stopped caring about us, right? And our careers and our livelihoods. Because they're not obligated to by design. It's not part of the system. And I guess that's the entire point of a company, really, especially the largest companies in the world. So finally, the last bit of kind of doom and gloom is this looming threat of artificial intelligence and those that would revel in it coming for our jobs. You don't have to read very far to see think pieces about how programming and programmers are over, right? And we're not. Let's face it, people have been coming for programmers forever. They've been coming for us since the idea of 4th-generation languages was trendy. And again, with the current crop of kind of programmerless tool chains and low code, enterprise has long been constrained by our cost because they've often seen us as a cost rather than as value. So programmers are expensive, and creators require years, if not decades, of training. And the more vital and expensive we become, the more it is in the best interests of those companies to minimize the risk of exposure to us, right? It's kind of weird. And, AI just lets them do more with less, right? That's the obvious play. And, and I'm not making this up. I'm the director of technology for a company that receives pitches in my inbox every day from companies telling me how we can reduce headcount with AI and pitching whatever their tool is. I'm not just speculating. Now, I hope that the best organizations will try and do much more with the same number of people, but don't be surprised to see organizations content with doing the same with less. So, the truth is this sentiment might make you think this is some kind of rallying cry against technological progress, but it's really not. It's a lot more nuanced than that. As technologists, we should always be pulling at the threads of ideas and seeing what's possible and where they go. We just have to do so in the knowledge that sometimes we're going to pull on a thread and invent new categories of things, but the outcome isn't always going to be what we expect. And sometimes we will lose things of value in the middle. That's the cost of change, right? It's the cost of experimentation. And I've kind of found it fascinating watching the current wave of AI technologies. And by that, I mean kind of AI as the collective term for mass adoption of machine learning and generative AI. It's true that some of the most interesting developments in my lifetime are existing in that space at the moment, and the genie is kind of out of the bottle, and we need to work with it. But our first challenge is to really make sure that we carefully and mindfully adopt anything that might ruin the rest of the things that we are, right? It's really important. So I guess in its current form, I don't think AI is an existential threat to programmers. It's just reached the point of utility where it looks good and has obvious uses. There's this really interesting piece where the current crop of AI has got to the point where it can fool amateurs that it's an expert, but as soon as an expert looks at its output, it's obviously just amateurish, right? And the same goes for it generating language and writing and art. Those things only look good to people that don't know any of those topics. And that's, of course, because amateurs don't understand that art is what we do to cope with the human condition, right? Art isn't images and words. A computer can't ever make art. A human using a computer can totally make art, though. It's about people. So code generation is, in that same sense, easier to fool people into believing, because nobody knows how to code. They've been telling us that for 25 years. So this kind of trend of AI will do all your code kind of looks okay until you really look at it. But the long tail of utility is obviously there, and as programmers, we see it, right? And that's cool, and we can embrace it. So we shouldn't fear it. So I guess it's easy to be left feeling like the Silicon Valley model is finally failing us, the workers. It's been failing video game workers for years, actually. It's a very relevant current topic. And video games are always the first bit of software to fail because they're the portion least respected by traditional business, right? It's just entertainment and kids' games. But ultimately, it's exactly the same field that suffers exactly the same repercussions. And, it also has failed startup workers many times before. It's come for people in more predictable, stable jobs. But now it's finally failing the people that went for those established, secure jobs, right? And we're feeling it. And it seems like companies have now discovered this is an unsustainable growth pattern. And actually the Silicon Valley model never really worked in the first place. It often resulted in unmet promises with just more and more people poured onto the fires of production until only they were eventually spat out when everything blew up. It's just not really sustainable, and actually the truth is that growth at any cost, actually has a cost, right? There's a cost at the end. So, and I'll be honest, it's all a little bit exhausting, right? All totally a little bit exhausting. And that's like a tragic understatement. It's so exhausting that we're burning out and giving up and sharing memes about what's your job after programming going to be, right? It's like in an industry where many of us have poured all of our energy in our lives. It's something we kind of love. And it's difficult to love what you do and see the market forces around it try and destroy it while you're just wanting to do a decent job and get paid, right? It really sucks. So record numbers of people are burning out as a result. And I know that because record numbers of people are me. It's me. I burnt out and it sucked. So a couple of years ago, I walked away from my desk at lunchtime at my pretty high-paid technology job, and I went to the pub downstairs, and I decided not to go back upstairs. That was it. I sat there and I thought, you know what? I'm done with all of this. And I'll be honest with you, it scared the crap out of me. Absolutely scared the crap out of me, because I'd wanted to be a programmer since I was 11 years old. So sitting there on my own in the pub, just being like, I'm not sure I can do this anymore. It was a horrible moment. I don't know anything else. So I needed to get better, right? And I needed to get better against the backdrop of all of this stuff that was going on that I could see clear as day. And I needed to get better against this backdrop of my lies and fall back in love with it, right? And it took me almost a year to get better. And it changed my perspective on a lot of the things that we do and a lot of the things I believed about my relationship to my work. And I did get better. So that's the good news. I did get better. And I want to spend some time talking about getting better and how I fell back in love with everything. So recovering from burnout was one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do in my entire career. I spent almost a year reconnecting with the things I loved about the work before I considered it a job. And I thought that was the only way to start, to retool from the beginning, to get back to where the person I was when I loved it. And that distinction might come as quite a weird distinction for some people, acknowledging that the work is distinct from the job. But for me, and I guess a lot of other people, the work itself was what made me want to do the job. It wasn't the other way around. No one aspires to go through Jira tickets every morning, right? It's not the thing. So I don't say that to denigrate people that work in technology because it's a job that can just fund their lifestyle either. I kind of envy them a little bit. I really think the people who are able to deal with technology and the technology industry as if it's a job and nothing more are actually much more resilient to the failings of the industry because they've effectively got a really healthy work-life balance with these companies. They know it's a business relationship. They know it's just work. These people have this secret superpower of being able to dispassionately choose something else if the job just becomes too much. But for me, I had to make sure I still loved it. And, I'll tell you all about exactly how I found that love later. But in discovering that I did still love the work, what I was forced to challenge was some of the behaviors that take place while we do the job that caused people to fall out of love with it as I kind of came back into doing work again. So on my way back, I changed my perspective on a lot of things. And I thought that was really, really healthy. And I changed my perspective about things that I thought were core to the way we worked. So I'm going to share a few of them with you. So this is my favorite big bad in everything. Strong opinions, loosely held. Very, very funny phrase. So it's difficult to find the origin of this term because I Googled it a lot for this. I've seen it attributed to Jeff Bezos more than once. I've also seen people claim they've been following it since the 1980s. So who knows? But it's funny because when you normally see people talking about this phrase, they use it to talk about how they believe that the best outcomes always come from a furious adversarial debate about technical topics amongst equals. And when you say it like that, it kind of sounds amazing. Yeah, cool, I'd love to do that. I think the truth is, it's super problematic how this phrase has come to characterize the worst of programming discourse over the last 15 years. So it's driven us to a culture where the person with the loudest voice or the most power or the biggest platform wins debates by default, right? And it's kind of the opposite, with some irony, of what the phrase was meant to stand for when people were suggesting it. So it's kind of let us reduce programming culture to this horrible shouting match, and we're just worse for it. Everyone's worse for it. With some irony, I think in many cases, its proponents are misunderstanding its original intent, actually, which was a mechanism by which people could take a bombastic position and then challenge it back to this point of reasonable, right? That was the idea. Say something absurd and then walk it back to the thing that can work. But it's basically become a cover for toxic certainty syndrome, where people that think they're right about everything yell about it too much. So I shifted my perspective over time to prefer the phrase thoughtful opinions calmly suggested, right? And I think in contrast, that makes a much more meaningful set of conversations, right? Basically ignore all the yelling dudes, doesn't mean shit. I also started doing this a lot as a former yelling man. I just speak less, irony appreciated right now. It could just be growing older, I guess, or maybe I just prefer to listen to what other people have to say now before I speak. I think that gives me more. I think it plays out a lot in technology because we're frequently introducing new things and new ideas, that it's really, really easy to dismiss ideas without giving them consideration. I see it happen all the time in architecture and design conversations where a single dominant narrative or a monoculture just takes hold. I love music, and I watch a lot of YouTube music, and there's this brilliant channel by a guy called Rick Beato, and he runs this great series of music videos called What Makes This Song Great, right? And it's beautiful. And I got into his videos probably about the time I was suffering from all this stuff. And all he does is he deconstructs songs, and he gets really excited about the awesome things in them. And I thought it is a really, really great way to think about competing ideas. Find what people love in the thing, not what you hate about it. So when people bring me new ideas or technology, anything really now, I just ask myself, what makes this thing great? What quality about it do they really love? And if you spend more time presuming the best of people and trying to understand that they brought you this idea because they love it and they think it's awesome, actually it defeats that horrible reactionary, this is garbage because I don't immediately know what it is, sentiment inside of you. And I think that makes discourse and conversation and debate better for everybody. And of course, the ultimate test of this concept is really to spend time with other languages and ecosystems. I think the very best thing a programmer can do in their career really is to really immerse themselves into a second language. Ideally, one where you don't understand why people love it, right? One that you really don't get. And you've got to stay with it until you feel that love. So what I'm saying is F sharp, there's still a chance. So learning another language to the point of productivity will challenge every single thing you think you believe about what best means. You'll know when you've got it right because you'll start preferring some aspects of that language to the language that you loved the most previously, and they will start to inform the way you design in that first language. It'll change your approach to best practice when you realize that best practice is just the dominant monocultural approach of a given language and changes with context. It'll change how you think of design patterns when you realize that design patterns are mostly just bug fixes for limitations in programming languages and frameworks, right? Things you have to do repeatedly because nobody solved them once properly. And it's pretty addictive, you know? It becomes a superpower to learn that you can shift around your career and your livelihood isn't tied to the whims of one company or vendor or set of organizers. It's freedom, but especially because it helps you understand other programmers better. And if we understand each other better, we work together better. And you know, this is, of course, because language wars and framework wars basically have to stop. This is an uncomfortable truth for every keyboard warrior or even advocate out there. Most programming languages and frameworks are totally good enough, like totally fine, totally benignly good enough. And more than that, most languages that are used today are actually pretty excellent and work well in almost all cases. There are these competing schools of thought, right? The idea that you should use the best tool for the job and the idea that the best tool for the job is the one that you know. Well, both things can be true at once. You know, that's the simple truth. So the reality is in programming that most of our tools are actually the same and they have a shared lineage and a shared future. And if you look at the trends of programming languages today, most of those futures and language features are converging. And I think this is like awesome. This is something worth celebrating. We're finally growing up as an industry where we're finding our first real set of solved answers in programming. And there's a lot of problem spaces that are kind of now post-innovation, and we're just working on ergonomics, and that's amazing. You know, server-side web frameworks all kind of turn into MVC. Async and await is pretty viral, but basically a good enough programming model for I/O-bound operations. Functional reactive programming, quite good for UIs. Types and type safety are better than having none, right? It's just things that we're kind of working out the truth. In the same way that I have a respect for any kind of recorded music simply because of the huge effort it takes for it to exist at all, I feel like any programming language or framework that's famous enough that you're getting paid to write software in it, probably good enough, honestly. Probably the amount of effort people put into it, probably good enough. So I kind of want everyone to love each other's choices a little bit more as well and respect that. So while we're talking about programming language wars, let's also chuck out all the bike shedding, right? So bike shedding is one of those phrases that has kind of seeped into programming consciousness, even if programmers really don't always understand what it means. It's when feedback is solicited about a complicated topic from people with no context. So instead of providing meaningful input into the hard bit, they just spend a bunch of time talking about the rubbish bit on the side that no one cares about. So the color of the bike shed becomes the point of the argument, not how the storage mechanisms and locks and doors work. So when I was in my recovery period, I spent a lot of time thinking about what caused my strife in day-to-day work and how I preferred working. And one of the big themes was that I was just exposed to this excruciating amount of bike shedding on a day-to-day basis of people debating things that truly were of no importance. And, you know, what we practically kind of build it into our workflows. You know, so many organizations default to this kind of pull request-driven development model, which is basically, hey, here's something you have no context on, argue about it, right? It's like, it's pretty funny, right? It's why conversations about things like formatting become so visceral, and it's why everyone has an opinion on naming, because actually, those are the things that you can have an opinion on without context. It's the easy bit. So wherever feedback is solicited, we can all change our behaviors. You know, so I kind of changed myself to just be permissive by default. Accept the code. You can always change it later, right? You can just change it, it's fine. And I think we suffer this monocultural danger in a lot of different places with kind of the one way and the correct rule that we picked. And I kind of believe that any intentional or thoughtful approach to building a solution is normally good enough, actually. It's as our industry has grown through this awkward teenage phase, we've become obsessed with this idea of engineering. We're engineers, we're doing engineering. And in finding that one correct answer or the one pattern, and honestly, the only thing I can tell you is that if you think you found the one good design for everything, you're wrong, right? That's probably the one absolute truth. So many of our big hits in software were trying to push into being more creative, into making things more flexible, in fact. And actually pushing against that monoculture breeds new innovation. Agile was originally about describing just new lightweight methods to replace industrial manufacturing project management that plagued software. The movement towards microservices was originally kind of anti-standardization, favoring for local optimization and throwaway pieces of code. All of the best bits of software work best when it's like good science fiction, internally consistent, right? Not when it's completely uniform, which is kind of a tyranny to anyone that doesn't agree. So the damage that monoculture does to software flared up in a lot of really interesting places. So when you're going through the motions and doing stand-ups you get no value from, when you're making boilerplate wrapping classes in your code because that's the pattern, right? All of this stuff is just following instruction. Industry becomes a much kinder place when we can accept that competing ideas exist without conflict. And competing ideas is kind of the magic that you get from making things for a living. So while a lot of this might feel really obvious if you've been working in software for any amount of time, I bet you can think of 100 examples in your day-to-day work that contradicts all this stuff, right? And I think it's because the pace of change in software is kind of exhausting, honestly, like it really, really is. I say the same thing to every young person or student that comes to me for career advice. I just say, look, if you want to work in software, make sure you love learning stuff if you're going to get into programming, because it's the only thing I can tell you about the rest of your career is you're going to be learning stuff over and over again. It's the only thing I can promise you about the job. So that newness, though, is also the most exciting part, right? It's the cool bit. We get to make the future. But it requires an open mind and a calm disposition to survive in for any amount of time. Because if you fall in love with that one thing, I can promise you it will change. Realize that the technology choices that you make are temporary and they are not your identity and they're not your personality. Otherwise, this constant pace of change will leave you in a perpetual fear of becoming irrelevant and feeling like comments of your work are comments about you as a person. The good news is, I learned almost everything, that almost anything that is mainstream enough that you've done a job in it for basically lasts long enough that you can do it until you get bored, right? Like every technology choice is kind of good enough again. So a bit of a shout out to all the people that did COBOL when it was still cool and are still doing it today. I see you. So we have kind of this short institutional memory in programming that's interesting to look at because despite being a young discipline, it also kind of adds to the cognitive load that contributes to burnout. So in the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen the rise of principal engineering, staff plus engineering, and other names for the individual contributor track. And I think we've had historically a real brain drain problem in programming disciplines from probably the mid-2000s to maybe 2014, as programming was largely perceived as like a young person's game that you grew out of. And that meant that if you wanted to progress in your career, you had to go into management and you had to walk away from the thing that you actually picked up because you loved it and you were good at it. And not only did that vanish, a lot of a generation of engineers, there's a whole bunch of people that just disappeared from programming who had the knowledge that they were no longer sharing. It contributed to this kind of long shadow of poor management cast over programming, as great people who were really good at one job got no formal training in their next job and mismanaged a generation of engineers. And, it's such a shame that happened, right? It's really sad. And I think, thankfully, the rise of the individual contributor track means that this is getting better and that there are increasingly roles for people that want to program for life, right? That for senior people that are still real. Because here's one of the great truths, that the best people to run engineering businesses are people who still understand the work. And the moment that you forget the work and forget what it's like to do the work, you become irrelevant. So I think there's this kind of interesting side effect of a discipline with this limited institutional memory, is you end up with this obsession with newness. And people fight with this all the time, right? By promoting up and out the people that built the systems that the next generation of programmers grew up maintaining, the knowledge of decisions made and that the reasoning kind of left with them in time. And I find it endlessly ironic for an industry that is so good at introspection that we're often so bad at history, right? Like it's funny. And if you last long enough as a programmer, you see the concepts reinterpreted and reinvented over time, precisely because we didn't quite write it down the first time round. And we kind of lost the knowledge. Or when we did, the people that knew where the papers were weren't around to say, hey, you can read this. So I'm hoping that we're getting better at this as an industry. At the same time, though, it doesn't mean that old knowledge is always superior to new knowledge. So when I see people try and pull rank or disregard new ideas at a glance due to, there's this classic expression, 20 years of 2 years of experience, it makes me really, really sad. You know, we should always make sure that we understand our roots so we don't repeat mistakes of the past. But equally, it's perilous to cling on to the thing that you used to do and disregard any new ideas, even if they're just a small change, just because you have experience. If you were doing the same job again and again and again, is it really experience or just tenure? You know, in almost all cases, I'd much rather work with a junior engineer with a couple of years of experience in a diverse range of technology than someone with 20 years of experience in the same thing over and over again, because you would get better ideas than the person who was obviously closed to anything that's happened since they first learnt. You'd be much happier in technology, in fact, when you maintain an open mind to the people that are bringing you new things, even if you don't understand why they love them at first. And you know, the truth is, the older folks amongst us have the responsibility to understand why people love something new, rather than trying to make them do the only thing we know. So the short institutional memory of technology leads to this kind of pendulum swing of competing ideas, and we all feel this at the moment, you know. And it can feel exhausting to be told, hey, this thing is good, no, this thing is good, actually go back to this thing, actually come forward to this thing again and again and again, in like a 7-year repeating cycle. You know, we're currently in the middle of a bunch of those at the moment, which is particularly amusing. There's the monoliths to microservices to modular monoliths thing, and inevitably 7 years microservices again, right? Remind me. There's client-side compute to server-side compute to client-side compute to server-side compute. And the truth is that actually the new things are a refinement of the old thing and not just the same thing again. And every time I see people write off the swing back, I always think, oh, well, you're not really reading the details, because actually we've learned a lot in the interim, right? And we should be focusing on why the new thing is different than the old thing, rather than just disregarding it as the same old stuff. You know, your career won't end if you're doing a thing that isn't trendy, is the truth. Just treat those who run away and later return with a little bit of grace. Like, we don't need to make fun of people for trying. So I say again, there's no one good design. So one of the interesting things that occurred to me as I was making my way back to the job part of my career was how much more difficult this process is for people that haven't been doing the work for close to 30 years. So over the last 10 or 15 years, while the industry was booming yet suffering from a huge skills shortage, we spent a lot of time trying to increase the accessibility of getting into technology. And that was a good thing. You know, it's opened doors for different kinds of people that would never have seen tech as an option for them before, and I think that's brilliant. On the flip side, we've rapidly assimilated lots of people into our workforce who are now kind of being chewed up and spat back out by this downturn, who are kind of suffering from this very specific problem that they're a lot less hireable than they think they are, right? And it's really scary. So how do you plot out your career and work with some of these invisible constraints that you might be accepting without knowing you're being subjected to them? So, specialization. Let's talk about being a specialist. So when you first enter tech, you'll be heavily incentivized to specialize, always. This is kind of the backbone of all of the Learn Web Dev in 6 weeks style courses, right? It's boot camps, and I love these things, and I think they're super, super enabling for people. But specializing early makes you commercially useful, and businesses love it because they can pay reduced rates for someone who is technically early career, but can still get a decent working knowledge of some sufficiently deep topic. And it feels good because you can be useful and you can do a job that's rewarding. And it's a good way to make money relatively fast. So specialization, kind of good. You know, you get a good title in a low number of years. However, Specialization doesn't last ever. And this is one of those big you are here moments, because I think a lot of people that are stuck in the hiring grind at the moment are suffering from this particularly. The problem with the pace of technology change and how relatively fickle it is in what it values from year to year is that if you get forced into specializing early, it's entirely possible for you to get stuck with all of the other specialists after being lulled into this false sense of security based on a handful of years of experience with a job. So it's easy for the technology that you specialize in to become unfashionable. And that's scary, right? And it's easy to be lost if your entire identity is tied up in being a particular kind of developer as trends change around you. Specialization is as much a risk as it is a blessing. It's why being a .NET developer or a React developer or a PHP developer is actually a risk to your professional identity. You're tying your success to something you do not control. And contained in here is this conundrum, really. Specialize early, get paid, get your senior title, but don't get comfortable. When you're in those early specialist roles, you should, at your very best, broaden your technical horizons. If you're a front-end dev, contribute to the back-end APIs every moment you get. Back-ender, learn React. It's never going away. iOS dev, do bug fixes in Android. Don't let the company flatter you with a job title without the experience, because you'll end up with a title that doesn't reflect what you actually do, and that's a job hunting nightmare. So the actual way to succeed in programming for my money, despite what it seems earlier in your career, is not to be an expert in a language or a framework or a tool, though those things are valuable skills, and despite the fact that it will get you paid. The way to get paid forever is to become an expert in problem solving, talking in trade-offs, and the metagame of programming, right? You do that by exposing yourself to different things, different languages, different ideas, and assimilating them into your body of knowledge, and learning the language of those different contexts so you can map them to one another. Unfortunately, though, businesses are always going to like putting people into nice little resource-shaped boxes. So it's the path harder traveled. You're always going to have to do work to break out of the confines in which you're placed. And it'll be confusing, and it might not feel like a plan, and it might feel like you're thrashing around, but that's okay. It was the same for everybody that ever escaped it. Now, the other piece of evergreen career advice that I can give to people as we go into the next decade is that we need to own the work where we can. And I can only tell you what really worked for me. I published and generalized versions of any writing I do for my job. I open source as much of the software that I write that I can. Anything I can do in public, I will. It's the only way you can take anything with you. And I do all this not for some grand, altruistic, though sometimes, purpose. I do it knowing that I don't own the businesses I'm working for. And I'll do the best to keep my access to anything that was important to me that I work on in the process, because that's the work, not the job. You also need to be careful giving the fun and interesting ideas to your employer, especially not during working hours, right? If you have an idea that you love so much that you want to do it after 5 p.m., definitely find out how you can do it not for your job and take it out of the room, right? Early on in my career as a manager, I used to send people home for working on our software after hours. If I was leaving, they were leaving the office too. Didn't care. Open source it, bring it back in. So a lot of the people in this room, as you get a little bit older and you end up leading people, you'll end up maybe fortunate enough to be in this position of leadership. And the truth is, it doesn't matter if it's a team or a department or a company. You should really take the opportunity to be the kind of leader that you needed when you were a younger dev. Facilitate, de-escalate, help people find the mental models and lenses to look at disagreements through that aren't conflict, right? Be kind, help. Be clear, give people measurable goals, communicate freely. When you get made a manager, go read some management books. I know this sounds ridiculous, but it feels tragic to me that most of the people that move into leadership just kind of do it and they don't prepare for it. And actually, they fail at this first hurdle of not doing the learning. We can change that. You can read the books. Treat it like a programming assignment. You can be that leader. And if you really, really want to change the face of the industry, well, understand that you can't make software for everybody if it isn't made by everybody. That's just the truth. I don't think it's possible to give you a single bit of advice on diversity and inclusion in one slide that isn't nuanced and subtle. But I know if you don't take it seriously, your products will suffer because technology is now used by everybody. Take it seriously, even if it challenges your own beliefs. Don't be the guy at the conference that asks the woman if it's really important and not just statistics. Like, I've seen that happen at every conference I've been to in the last 3 years. Don't be that person. We can all be better if we try. So finally, let's talk about the good parts, right? All the good stuff. Passion. So passion is this weird emotive word that companies have weaponized against us for the last 2 decades, right? Caring about things is good, but we should probably retire passion as a descriptor. So passionate developers was often used as this horrible hiring keyword for people that go the extra mile and take ownership and other weasel words for work more than we're paying you to work. Your passion has been used against you, honestly, to make you work for less than you deserve. And all those fiery connotations of passion have been used to excuse poor behavior. So passion's got to go. Instead, joy. Let's talk about joy. Let's talk about all the stuff we find joyous and taking joy in the work. And I think that's a lot more real and human. So other than adjusting my own personal approach and perspective to the more problematic parts of the industry as I came back into the work, I fixed myself by forgetting about all of that and just reconnecting with the stuff, with the actual nuts and bolts of programming. I can't promise this was going to work for you, but it worked for me. I focused on playing with technology again like it was a toy and learning again. I was fortunate enough to be able to afford the downtime on my own terms, but for a year I basically did nothing but play. I helped people with code in languages that I'd never seen. It was a great low-stakes way of making me feel productive, like I was still part of a community. I did projects that forced me to learn and challenge my own assumptions in languages I'd never used, in frameworks that I'd always hated, in things that I thought sucked. I made games. Games are fun. I got into programming as a kid because I wanted to make games. Who didn't? Just small things, not commercial things. I got into hardware programming for a bit. I ran code kata clubs online for a while. I tried other languages. I took the time to do all the things that I'd have been interested in if I wasn't involved in my day job. And I found that actually that original childlike joy in the work came back. And that was amazing. I made programming magic for myself again by picking things that I didn't think I could do and things that were unknown to me, right? And it's weird getting that feeling back that maybe you've not felt in 20 years of being a bit lost in the magic of the technology. And I got to feel proud of the outcomes. I made stuff and I played until I felt like I could work again. Now, to be able to do that is a privilege that many people could not afford. So I want to really, really highlight that. But if you're feeling burnt out and tired and maybe looking for work, find the joy in something that might help you get there. Maybe it is time for a change. It's also really easy to in our kind of over-connected world to feel disheartened when you stop comparing yourself to other people and where they are. Never compare yourself to other people who are doing the same work as you. Only focus on yourself. Going at your own pace is fine. And the unfortunate thing about technology is there's an infinite, extremely online collection of people who will tell you whatever you're doing is wrong. They really, really will. However much fun you're having, they will tell you the thing that you love sucks. There's no point in listening to them. There's no point in playing to the gallery. Doesn't make sense. Just ignore them. And on the flip side, it's kind of equally important to keep yourself and your ego in check as you grow. A vote for yourself isn't the same thing as a vote in overconfidence. That's how you become the loud shouting people. You can keep yourself from being one of those extremely online, over-opinionated bores by always staying curious and always trying to understand competing opinions and hopefully always feeling a little bit out of your depth. When you're a little bit out of your depth, you're learning something. So if you're getting the urge to continuously tell other people that they're wrong, there's a good chance you probably need to work on yourself a little bit first. So having found that magic again in the work, I feel kind of reinvigorated about the creative aspect of programming. If you were a writer, you'd have your own body of work. If you're a painter, you'd have paintings. As programmers, this is our work, right? This is the stuff that we can take. It's the stuff we care about. I think this is the good part of passion, like the JavaScript book. I think the joy in making programming magic again is, by doing things you care about, is the good part. And that's the beautiful thing about being here in this room at this conference right now, is I think you're in the right room to find the next thing that's probably going to make you happy and find that joy, right? And I think that's amazing. So I think I now understand why Baz Luhrmann released the Sunscreen song in 1999, is what I'm saying. Out of this hope that we could make our environment that little bit better for everybody. And seeing as I am in Sydney, I'd like you to forgive me in advance for the indulgence. I'm going to channel my inner Baz just this once, because it's hot in here and we should wear sunscreen, right? So, ladies and gentlemen of NDC Sydney 2024, use source control. If I could only offer one tip for the future of your programming career, source control would be it. The long-term benefits of source control are just about the only non-controversial topic on software development that have been proven to work. The rest of my advice here has relatively little empirical evidence other than my own meandering experience, but I will expense this advice now. Imagine the beat in the background. YouTube would copyright strike it down. Enjoy the thrill of learning how to make things while programming is still magic. There will come a time where you can explain most of the things you see as your eye for patterns improve. But as you start, revel in the sublime wonder of technology while it's mysterious and magic. You are smarter than you think. Choose a text editor that you like. Choose two. Doesn't matter. Worrying about the text editors other people choose is about as meaningful as worrying about the weather in the morning. Don't worry about which computer or operating system you use. Ignore people who think that your choices here reflect who you are. They are just tools. Don't compare your career or social media presence to the people that exist only to court drama, controversy, or hot takes. Ignore people that hate the things you love. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but you'll reach your own conclusion in time. Take screen breaks. Respect the systems that came before you, but don't fear diverging from their implementations. These legendary systems are paying for your work. Know that one day your beautiful greenfield project that you're working on might get the chance to be legendary too. Care for them, patch them, improve them. Be patient. Don't reach for rewriting things so readily. Sometimes things are complicated, and you won't understand them without spending some time with them. But that's okay. Doesn't mean you're bad at your job. Programming is hard. You only really get better at it by doing it. Realize that it takes most people about 10 years to be any good at it at all, and it's a path hard traveled. Maybe you'll go into management. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll get famous for a meme you post on whatever replaces Twitter and laugh about it later. Success is a mixture of opportunity, luck, and effort, and misattributing it to any one of those things will do you a disservice. Write tests. I don't care what type, but write them and keep them up to date. I've used all kinds of tests, and all that I want is one that breaks when something bad happens. Writing tests and writing them well is the one piece of Agile that I've never seen a single smart person argue against. It's an evergreen skill, and you can take it with you. Enjoy hobbies that aren't only programming. You'll never have a rounded enough worldview to understand the people who use your software if you don't. Wear headphones in open plan offices. Appreciate the colleagues who take time to show you how things work. The colleagues who are patient and kind when you are new somewhere. Treat that new kid that doesn't know anything with the same grace when it's your turn to be the teacher. Everybody's code sucks, including your own. Remember the old adage that you should write your code like the next person that reads it is a murderer that knows where you live. Write error messages like you're in love with the person that has to read them. Don't argue with your colleagues in pull requests. They're your friends, and you're all trying to do your best. You'll need them to accept your bad PRs too, so be kind. Joke and code, pair program, laugh and chat. The uniform language and bond you form as a team will probably get you through really ugly times with a smile. Don't sweat if someone doesn't agree with you. Criticism of your work is not criticism of you as a person. Write user stories for that bug. But also know when the right thing to do is just fix it and push it anyway. Follow the rules. Break the rules. Every rule exists as a bandage on the wound of somebody else's trauma. Care about the software you write? It's your work, even if nobody sees it. Spend time with it and take a breath. Go home on time. There is no work that won't still exist in the morning. Anything anybody says to convince you otherwise is them thinking that the profits of their company are more important than your life. Be careful with best practices and those who promote them. There are many good ways to solve most problems. Most of the time, it's just people sharing what worked with them once. Share your work. It's good enough. Put the green ticket in the bowl on your way out so the conference speaker feels a little bit less alone doing the silly thing on stage. But trust me on the source control. I've been David Whitney. You've been wonderful. Go and learn something that helps you find joy. Thank you, NDC Sydney.